Good morning, everybody. This is a live severe weather briefing as we have yet another tornado threat today. It looks like this is going to set up across northern Illinois into central lower Michigan. Once again, another strong low-level jet, well in excess of 30 knots out of the southwest, overtop weaker surface winds and abundant moisture out there, and a pretty large-scale trough as well that's developing. A surface low is going to migrate from western Iowa up to western Wisconsin very slowly today. And just ahead of that, there's going to be a stout low-level jet in excess of 30 knots that I think is going to be causing some serious problems later on this afternoon, with yet another potential for a regional tornado outbreak, similar to what we had yesterday across northern Illinois into northern Indiana. And I'm also going to break down the environment, the conditions that came together to create that outbreak yesterday. Initially, the tornado risk was focused over northwestern Ohio into southeastern lower Michigan, and that was out ahead of a decaying MCV, or mesoscale convective vortex. That can increase the low-level shear in the vicinity of that if it can destabilize in the vicinity of that mesoscale convective vortex. But in the wake of that mesoscale MCV, there was a bit of some subsidence, hence some veering of those surface winds, and that was across northeastern Indiana, northwestern Ohio, southeastern lower Michigan. But then back behind it, in response to that trough that was building over the central U.S., you had a strengthening of that low-level jet. You had a backing of those low-level winds across northeastern Illinois, later on in the evening across northwestern Indiana as well. And once that low-level jet, the nose of it, increased to about 35 knots, it just went nuts right near sunset, and that's when those storms started producing tornadoes, and we're going to break down that as well. And the video I'm playing right now is lightning that was over Hays, Kansas last night. And I shot some slow motion video of that. And you can see some of those crazy anvil crawlers out there with storms that were approaching Hays, Kansas. Beautiful Hays, Kansas, an awesome place to visit. If you storm chase a lot, you've been through Hays numerous times. I recommend Trios for their steaks. They do have incredible steaks out there. Got Gizmo, her standard filet mignon. That's what she eats, nothing but the best for baby Gizmo. But there you can see those anvil crawlers. Beautiful storm there just to the west of Hays. And then a massive shelf cloud arrived on the western horizon there in Hays, and then got hit by a big time windbag there in the evening, just as Gizmo was trying to produce a stool last night. And I was going to try to make it up to northern Illinois today, but I'm just kind of out of position. I'm in Hays right here, right in the center of that positively tilted trough. And this is a textbook Midwest tornado season here. You've got a lot of deep layer shear, a lot of bulk shear with a positively tilted trough here. Quite a bit of anticyclonic curvature here throughout the warm sector. You've got a decent low-level jet as well. Excited by this trough here. You've got a low-level jet of about 35 knots out of the southwest over top of this. Abundant moisture, as is often the case during the summer months across the Corn Belt and the Great Lakes region, with those dew points into the mid-70s out there. So a ton of moisture in place. Definitely not your standard MCV setup. This looks good on a large scale ahead of this trough as that low-level jet increases to above 35 knots out of the southwest. You've got 40 to 50 knots here at 500, creating a 40 knots at least a bulk shear between the 0 to 6 kilometer layer. So definitely supportive on a large scale for supercell storms. And it looks like those storms are going to focus in a band across northern and central Illinois into central lower Michigan as well. Here you can see in the bottom right, this is just in general the 0 to 3 kilometer EHIs here, showing the best overlap between that 0 to 3 kilometer shear, low level shear, and in general surface-based cape. And you can definitely see the target area stretching from central northern Illinois across northern Indiana as well, and into central and southern lower Michigan. Some pretty favorable environmental conditions there for supercell storms and even those tornadoes. And this is all from the HRRR model. And as much as I dislike this model, it does pretty good on these upper Midwest setups when you have such abundant moisture that it's basically impossible to mix out that moisture. It doesn't do as good over the Great Plains and the High Plains, however. It can tends to have a dry bias. Still convex, so it's often right for the wrong reasons across the Great Plains and the High Plains. But here in the Midwest and the Mid-South, the HRRR does a pretty good job out here when the moisture is just too deep, where it's almost impossible for it to mix out. But you can see this convective band of supercells stretching from central Illinois, even back to the I-70 corridor, all the way back to St. Louis. But your best shear exists from this corridor across northern Indiana and into southern lower Michigan. So I think you're going to have those small in scale supercell storms producing potentially even big tornadoes up here. Similar area that was impacted yesterday. And we're also going to break down the setup yesterday to discuss how it's different. This setup, though, is similar, just that it has that strong low-level jet. Here is the 850 analysis. And we'll show you the hodograph too, just show you that wind shear that's in place. But there's the trough, and here is that low-level jet axis. And look at that low-level jet in excess of 30 knots there, stretching from central Illinois, central and northern Illinois, all the way up through northern Indiana and into southern lower Michigan. And in fact, the strongest low-level jet is right here, hammering southern lower Michigan. The nose of that jet right up into central lower Michigan, up near the Mount Pleasant area, where I spent a little bit of time up there. Usually in lower Michigan, growing up there, the relatively cool waters of Lake Michigan can have a stabilizing effect. So any storms that develop on the Wisconsin or Illinois side will likely become a line, often not maintaining their supercell characteristics over Lake Michigan. But I think in this case, these storms are going to develop in southwest lower, maybe off that lake breeze front near Grand Rapids, and then they'll evolve off to the east and then move into that strongly sheared lower Michigan there. Low-level jet in excess of 40 knots there across southern lower Michigan. And that low-level jet extends all the way back to St. Louis. And anywhere within that corridor of deep moisture, 35 knots at 850, about a kilometer above the ground, you're going to have tornado potential if a supercell storm can evolve in that environment. And it's beneath that belt of 40 to 50 knots at 500 too. So there's plenty of bulk shear for those supercell structures. A well-formed low-level jet ahead of that positively tilted trough axis off to the west. And it looks like a surface low this morning is located over western Iowa, and it's going to slowly meander off to the northeast, being centered over western Iowa at that time. But that slow-moving surface low is going to pass basically western Iowa up to western Wisconsin. The instability axis displaced a little bit off to the southeast, but that's also where that low-level jet axis is located. So very favorable hodographs within that mode. There you can see the surface low by 21Z, located over the northeast corner of Iowa into western Wisconsin there, deepening into the low thousands. About 1,004 millibar surface pressure there by the time it moves into southwestern Wisconsin. And you can see that band of convection from central Oklahoma all the way up through central Missouri, central Illinois, northern Indiana, and into central and southern lower Michigan. And really there is a non-zero threat of a tornado throughout that convective line, even back into Oklahoma where there's some deeper moisture. But really I think that the greater wind shear is just a little bit out ahead of that from northern Illinois up through central and southern lower Michigan. And there is a slight risk that's in place right now. Here is the dew points, though. First of all, just classic Midwestern dew points there in the mid-70s. St. Louis all the way up through the Champaign area. Chicago, you're very moist. Grand Rapids coming in with mid-70s dew points. Dry conditions, though, over the Appalachians, the central and southern Appalachians there. A bit of a drought continues there across that location near the Appalachians where you have some drier air. But then on the west side of that anticyclone, a lot of moisture return. Big dew points over the Corn Belt there as well. And here is a forecast sounding and hodograph. This is in central lower Michigan, central southern lower Michigan, just ahead of that convective line, a little bit east of Grand Rapids as well. And look at this low-level jet, pushing 50 knots there in southern lower Michigan. That's your 1 kilometer wind there, and that's over top of a relatively weaker surface wind at about 10 knots. That creates a minimum of 30 knots of your 0 to 1 kilometer shear vector. So that's a long 0 to 1 kilometer shear vector. Your storm motions here about east-northeast at about 30 knots, a little bit faster than they were yesterday Yesterday, those storm motions are at about 20 knots. You've got a little bit stronger mid-level flow for these storms, but that's still fairly decent critical angle at about 50 degrees. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of your right movers are a little bit closer to due east, and that will get your critical angle closer to 90 degrees. But there's a ton of storm relative helicity enclosed by that hodograph curve and that storm motion vector. Looking at some of the numbers, you've got over 200 0 to 1 kilometer SRH. You're pushing 300 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative helicity. And so this is a very, very favorable setup here. Your cape is quite skinny, almost like a tropical looking sounding here ahead of those storms. You're looking at about 78 over 73. I wouldn't be surprised if you do get into the 80s there also across central and southern lower Michigan with some breaks in those clouds. But a lot of speed shear with this 50-knot low-level jet at 850 out of the southwest over top a relatively weak surface wind at 10 knots. Most of your wind shear is from speed shear with this hodograph, which is a little bit different than yesterday. We did have a little bit more directional shear for the setup yesterday, and it was in the wake of that MCV. So now let me show you just really quickly here the setup that happened yesterday. This is your storm relative helicity there as compared to today. Your wind shear is a little bit further north, but this was your belt of wind shear. And notice how you had those that stronger wind shear located over southeastern lower Michigan into northwestern Ohio. That was in the associated with that MCV, or a dying complex of storms that was moving into that area, locally enhancing that wind shear. But then look at that belt of wind shear, how it extends all the way back into central northern Indiana and into central Illinois. And that was in response to a low-level jet that developed as well. Look at this low-level jet, a nose of a 35-knot low-level jet punching into the I-70 corridor there near Champaign. And one thing that's important is to not always target the core of the low-level jet, but target the gradient, the northern gradient of that greater wind shear, the northern gradient of the low-level jet. And that gradient was punching into northern Illinois at the time of those tornadoes. So the nose of that low-level jet punching right up into that zone there. South of Kankakee, there's a wedge tornado that crossed Interstate 55 near the Danforth area, right at the nose of that 35-knot low-level jet, and sufficiently removed from the MCV. So you had some subsidence behind the MCV. Those surface winds tended to veer just a little bit. Here is the surface-based cape, the RAP and analysis. I was saving these images as the regional tornado outbreak was happening yesterday. Now let me show you how it looked here. This is the RAP analyzed cape and surface winds across the target yesterday. And notice how these winds across northeastern Indiana into southeastern lower Michigan are more out of the southwest. So that's in the wake of that MCV. You had some subsidence, some veering out of those winds, and that's why southeastern lower Michigan, northwestern Ohio was really unable to materialize even late. And then notice back here, in the nose of this instability axis, the nose of that southwesterly low-level jet at about 35 knots, your atmosphere begins to recover well in the wake of that MCV. And this is in response to the general large-scale trough, the positively tilted trough that's evolving today. But you did have a stout 35-knot low-level jet. You had an instability axis easily recovering. And you always want to target the subtle noses of these instability axes. And here you can see this instability axis here, also the nose of the low-level jet. You want to work that northern gradient up there as that was punching in relatively late, about 7, 8, 9 p.m. even. There was a pretty big tornado in northwestern Indiana, a bigger one near the Danforth area there, crossing I-55 just to the south of Kankakee, right on the nose of that instability axis, recovering in the wake of that MCV. Here across southeastern lower Michigan, northwestern Ohio, northeastern Indiana, you had more southwesterly surface winds, which helped to weaken the wind shear a little bit. You also had a little bit of subsidence behind that MCV. So I saw that supercell structure that evolved in northwestern Ohio. The subsidence overwhelmed it. Eventually that storm died, but a little bit to the southwest, to the north of Indianapolis, that's where a decent tornado happened. That was also as this nose of instability nosed into central Indiana there. And the surface winds are sufficiently due south so that 35-knot southwesterly low-level jet with a change in direction from due south surface wind to southwesterly 1 kilometer wind, and that speed shear created favorable hodographs for a regional tornado outbreak. Central northern Illinois, central northern Indiana, the northwestern Ohio, southeastern lower Michigan target did not pan out because of the subsidence and the veering winds behind that MCV. But today, you've got, once again, you have a stronger low-level jet, 35 to 50 knots, stronger than yesterday. You do have some stronger deep layer shear today as compared to yesterday, as that trough has evolved a little bit to the east, and a lot of that stronger flow on the east side of this positively tilted trough, as you might expect. Once again, though, we've got a lot of moisture across this target area, across the upper Midwest today, with those mid-70s dew points rotating in there. So anytime you get this deep moisture, you get favorable bulk shear, a low-level jet in excess of 35 knots, even pushing 50 knots across central and southern lower Michigan. That's a recipe for these tornado outbreaks. They're smaller size supercells a lot of times. Big tornadoes, though, capable of producing big tornadoes underneath them. And it's the Midwestern tornado season. Sometimes you'll get these derechos, northwest flow events as well during these setups across the Midwest and the Great Lakes and across the Corn Belt. But then you can get setups like this that are very favorable for tornadoes. So let's dig in just a little bit deeper. First, I want to show you the convective outlook for today. We do have a slight risk. Once again, a 5% tornado risk here. And kind of dual slight risks. We also have a slight risk across the southern Texas Panhandle into eastern New Mexico. That area, probably some haboobs down there, near and south of Lubbock, down toward Monahans as well. This evening, as that haboob will extend down to the south. And that slight risk extends all the way into Oklahoma City area as well. 2% tornado threat, Lubbock up toward Oklahoma City. 5% tornado risk, though, over the target area we are just identifying, stretching from just northeast of St. Louis, including the Chicago area and central and southern lower Michigan and northern Indiana. So it's right in that belt of favorable wind shear beneath that low-level jet as well, where that's going to be, that setup should come together. And I love the wrap to really show how these environments destabilize. You've got some cloud cover here, some old decaying convective complexes here across northern Illinois into southern lower Michigan. But really, those will evaporate quickly this morning. Instability will start to build. It's already starting to build across northern Illinois. You can see that axis coming in from St. Louis up toward the I-70 corridor, poking in to Champaign. Southerly winds throughout this area as well. So you don't have, the MCV is a lot weaker to where you're not going to get big subsidence and veering winds back in its wake. I think we're just going to see development of these bands of supercells through northern Illinois into northwestern Indiana there, and eventually into southwestern lower. It looks like they developed very near Grand Rapids, where I grew up, just to the east of Grand Rapids as well. And then by 20Z, you've got an axis of 2,000 Cape punching in ahead of that convective line. Plenty of wind shear as well. The wind shear does have a tendency to eject from about 18Z from midday, 1 p.m. or so, Champaign to just south of Chicago, northwestern Illinois. It does want to jump up toward southern lower Michigan. So I do think that tornado threat could be a little bit earlier here in the next couple of hours across northeastern Illinois, northwestern Indiana, and then it could jump up to southwestern lower Michigan with that 50-knot low-level jet that materializes across southwestern lower as well. Look at that 45-knot low-level jet into Michigan. So I definitely see this as a pretty substantial tornado setup across southwestern into central lower Michigan as well, northwestern Indiana. And you've still got that 40-knot low-level jet extending all the way back to St. Louis with supercell storms down there in the southern mode. Likely going to see some tornado warnings down there as well. I should have just gone to Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, just hung out during this Midwestern season instead of trying to work the southern plains. I did get some spider lightning last night Got in a decent microburst as well yesterday on I-35. That was as I was coming back from chasing down into eastern Kansas along that outflow boundary. Right near I-35, north of Heston. It was kind of a surprise event because there was no severe thunderstorm warning. And then just as I got north of Heston, I started seeing all these vehicles that were pulled over to the side of the road. And I was like, oh, here we go. Things are starting to get serious. The wind starts to crank. It must have been pushing 85 miles an hour there. Everybody pulling over. I had to slow down to about 30 miles an hour. But then I looked at radar, and you could see this little reflectivity bulb just rocketing at about 70 miles an hour on the radar reflectivity. It was associated with a correlation drop as well. I know that this wasn't a tornado because I sampled all westerly winds, so I believe that it was a wet microburst within one of those convective elements on the backside. There were some drier conditions just to the south of that for some 35 to 40 degree dew point spreads. Probably had a lot of downdraft cape as well. And so I think that was a microburst, and it wasn't picked up on radar velocity because it was scanning just above where that wind was spreading out on the ground. So I think you had a big time downdraft. It hit the ground, spread out, and it was associated with that reflectivity max as it moved across I-135 there. Definitely some small debris in there hitting the car. Some rocks were hitting the left side of Dominator 4. And then I got to Hayes and saw this incredible lightning, so I shot some of this slow-mo lightning out there. There you can see some of that spider lightning anvil crawlers over Hayes, Kansas, one of my favorite towns here in Tornado Alley. But again, here is the HRRR model showing that the storms develop. This is the convective evolution at about 4 p.m. stretching from St. Louis all the way up to west of Lansing. Even along that synoptic scale warm front up there that sets up across central lower Michigan. Probably we'll get some spinners up there as well. So let's take a look at some of these soundings on the HRRR now here as it's coming in. Does a pretty good job. That. Also let's take a look at the surface map just to verify how high these moisture values are. Let me get out my colored pencils here. Heavy rain right now in Grand Rapids with that dying complex of storms. So this needs to get out of there, and then it'll start to destabilize as temperatures are getting closer to 80 coming out of the St. Louis area. 79 over 72, 82 over 78 just to the north of St. Louis, 77 over 75, east central Illinois. A lot of cloud cover out here, but you can see it doesn't take much in the way of breaks in the clouds to get those temperatures up near 80. So this instability axis is going to continue to punch off to the northeast. You're probably going to get stabilized right along the immediate Lake Michigan shoreline there in Chicago. Temperatures are the low 70s there, but still quite moist. But this low-level jet and instability axis is going to nose all the way into northwestern Indiana, southwestern lower Michigan there with time. Doesn't take much heating when your dew points are in the mid 70s to generate instability. So there's your surface low. Interesting that it has it so far northeast already on the HRRR analysis. Still though, it's going to meander up to western Wisconsin by peak heating. So it looks like at about late morning, you already start to get some storms beginning to fire up here on the nose of that instability axis across northeastern Illinois. You can monitor that instability axis by 17Z, nosing into northwestern Indiana here as well, 2,000 plus Cape. There is some rain, heavy rain in Grand Rapids, which could slow a little bit the progression of that instability axis, but once that moves off to the northeast and the sun comes out, temperatures will warm up rapidly, but you do have a lot more Cape back here into northeastern Illinois, into northwestern Indiana. It's possible that rain heavy rain so far this morning in southwestern lower Michigan could impede a little bit the development of big time instability, but you still get 2000 Cape all the way up to the Interstate 96 corridor, Grand Rapids to Lansing there. A little bit greater Cape though down into northeastern Illinois, back towards Champaign, northwestern Indiana as well. You can see that lake modification there a little bit to the west of Grand Rapids. So it's really, do you want to target the better Cape and you still have 35 knots at 850 down there and those southerly winds, or do you want to target the 50 knot low level jet with a little bit less instability up there across southwestern lower Michigan? But you still get a 50 knot low level jet all the way back into northeastern Illinois there, northwestern Indiana, into southern lower Michigan. And at your 0 to 1 kilometer shear in excess of 200 all the way back from the I-70 corridor here in central northern Illinois. Let me make sure I'm even showing the right target. Yep, sliding it off to the left a little bit. There you can see the 0 to 1 kilometer shear maximized from the I-70 corridor, northwestern Indiana, all the way up into central and southern lower Michigan. Let's look at a clean sounding here near the Champaign area. South-southwesterly surface winds at about 10 knots, increasing about 40 knots just above the ground, creating a very favorable hodograph there for tornado potential. Look at that hodograph near the Champaign area. Big 0 to 1 kilometer shear vector in excess of 30 knots. Very backed as well with that surface low hanging back. Pretty good, decent low-level jet all the way down through the St. Louis area. Some pretty good Cape there as well, even though you do have a little bit of warming at the mid-levels. Now let's look at a forecast hodograph near the Lansing area. Also quite favorable. Looks like some decent low-level Cape there as well. Very backed low-level winds. Low-level jet in excess of 50 knots there. So an even more favorable hodograph up toward the Lansing area. Slightly more favorable kinematics, decent Cape as well. So really this entire zone from central Illinois and possibly even back toward the St. Louis area could see some tornado warnings. Up through northwestern Indiana and southern lower Michigan looks quite favorable. Here's your 0 to 3 kilometer Cape. Those fans by 21Z. Quite a bit of 0 to 3 kilometer Cape there just to the east of Grand Rapids as well. So I'm seeing favorable hodographs for tornado potential throughout the swarm sector. I'm not sure where you'd want to target. I guess if you live in this area, you probably want to target the closest to your location, whether it be southwestern Michigan or northwest Indiana or all the way back to the Champaign area. But this entire belt looks quite favorable for tornadoes. Bulk shear is a little bit displaced. Your maximum bulk shear is a little bit displaced behind that convective line, but right along the southeastern fringe should be plenty of bulk shear there. That's likely underdone across that convective line. Well, you do have a greater bulk shear back behind the convective line a little bit. That's a negative I could see of this setup, is that the bulk shear may be lacking a little bit on the southeastern fringe of this, but I think that these supercells will be able to peel off that convective line and take full advantage of that wind shear. Look at that low-level jet, 850 low, centered up across northeastern Iowa into southwestern Wisconsin at this time. And big winds here at 850 ahead of those storms, 40 knots, 50 knots up into south central lower Michigan. And I think storms are going to develop at about midday here across central into northeastern Illinois. And then that line will spread all the way up toward the Grand Rapids area by mid-afternoon, just to the east of Grand Rapids. I expect those storms to develop. Significant tornado parameter, non-zero. It's there. Could even get a significant tornado or two, maybe even just near or just to the east of Grand Rapids. We'll probably get a tornado up there. I've never seen a tornado in Michigan where I grew up. I got out of there at 18 and moved to Oklahoma right away, spending the next 20 years down in Oklahoma with a couple distractions in there. But I do think that this area just to the southeast of Grand Rapids is going to be interesting. Look at that hodograph. Look at that cape. This is your sounding near and just to the east of Grand Rapids. I'm going to have to let all my family members and friends know. Activate chase mode out here. Stay tuned to those warnings on the Radar Omega app. Load up on Flex Seal. Got the Flex Seal hat on. Love this hat. Thanks. Thanks, Phil Swift. Thank you, Flex Seal, for this hat. And for the flex tape that I'm going to be using to adhere the bumper of Dominator 4. I'm going to put a stripe of flex tape on there, and that should hold my bumper on. So I'm excited here to monitor this broken line of supercell storms from really all the way down to Oklahoma, all the way up to the southern Great Lakes in the large warm sector of this positively tilted trough. But it does look like the most favorable environment for a significant tornado is up near and just to the east of Grand Rapids into central lower Michigan. But I think there's going to be tornadoes all the way back into northeastern Illinois as well. Central Illinois, down near the Champaign, Kankakee areas, up toward northwestern Indiana as well. So that's what we're looking at today, everybody. Hope you enjoyed my weather reports. I'm in Hays, Kansas, kind of far separated from everything. And I'm going to be doing a live briefing as these tornadoes materialize, if I can get back to my apartment in time. And then I'm going to be shifting gears toward July. I do think that toward early to middle July, the high plains are going to come awake once again. We're going to have kind of a consolidated zonal flow belt, a jet stream there across the northern U.S. Looks like a pretty active high plains pattern to me, even similar to that 2019 July and August pattern when we had all those very active high plains, and then Hurricane Dorian happened, and then doubled back and then intercepted more tornadoes in Wyoming in September there. I'm also going to be getting ready for hurricane season as well, intercepting more in the way of hurricanes this fall. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to my weather report. Allergies. Woo! Good luck to all the chasers up there in central northern Illinois, northern Indiana, central and southern lower Michigan. Do think that the setup looks quite favorable for tornadoes. Never stop chasing.